Thank you, Ms. Miller. Our next speaker will be Peggy Placier. Good evening.
I'm Peggy Placier, 209 South Greenwood, and I'm also here to talk about the August 23rd BSR meeting. And as you know, before that meeting, Race Matters Friends and the city were at a somewhat of a standoff over interpretations of the VSR. So we looked toward that meeting with great anticipation, thinking maybe now we'll get an explanation. So it was over an hour, however, in the meeting before anyone directly addressed the VSR. The city manager bragged about what CPD was already doing. Police officers told us about their assignments, about the impossibility of covering a beat while responding to calls. We saw maps. We heard from experts. News accounts the next day focused on pieces of the meeting, but not the whole confusing mishmash. Looking at my notes, I realized why it was so hard for reporters to summarize it and why my neck was so sore. I was a victim of policy whiplash. The city gave us 3 conflicting interpretations of the VSR. The first one was racial disparities result from officer biases. Some CPD efforts are based on this idea. For example, CPD has adopted a curriculum on fair and impartial policing created by self-styled national expert Dr. Lori Friedel. In fact, we heard from Dr. Friedel via online connection. She explained CPD's new policy on using demographics in apprehensions. The policy assumes that biases are inappropriate, and it also sets a high standard for justifying stops, in which officers must have a specific suspect description and intelligence linking a geographic area and type of crime to that suspect. Implementing this policy, she said, will require training. But the inference is that unwarranted stops would go down, and those are the ones that most alienate communities of color from the police. Although she admits she has no data to support this. Her theory is also based on individual psychology rather than systems or contexts, such as organizations or communities. Then we heard another explanation. Racial disparities may or may not indicate a problem. We don't know. But with better data, they would probably disappear. Don Love of Empower Missouri took this position. Mathis said he had learned so much from Love, it was clear that Love's presentation would not be hostile to the city. Love, however, dismissed Mathis's poverty explanation of the VSR. Differences in poverty between whites and blacks in Columbia are high, but not high enough to create such disparities. His hunch was that a new data system coming online will show that disparities result from hotspot policing, in which police are concentrated in high crime areas identified through data mapping. Control for that, and voila, no more racial disparities. Blacks just happen to live in high crime areas. Police flock to those high crime areas and apparently stop so many people who are not criminals but might be, that they eventually, through the needle in a haystack principle, come up with some productive stops. This is a rational calculation of the odds, but unfortunately a lot of innocent people get caught up in that dragnet. I guess that's a mixed metaphor. Oh well, needles and dragnets. But so Chief Burton gave Love a thumbs up sign, good work done. But Love should hedge his bets for a while and stick with his maybe, maybe not position, because we don't know what's going to happen with the new system. And then finally, we heard from we didn't hear from Professor Milo. We heard from Columbia Police Officer Association Executive Director Dale Roberts. And he attempted in a very hurried, jumbled, and emotional way to summarize what the professor had to say. The main point to Roberts seemed to be that CPD officers are not racist because black people commit more crimes, vindicating the officers he represents while insulting the black community. Looking at the study itself, which we are doing a full-blown analysis of it, Milo claims to have discredited the VSR as poorly done and inciting undeserved criticism of CPD. And why would CPD need Friedell's anti-bias training? There is no bias. No wonder I had whiplash. Although she was granted very little time, researcher Tara Morney-Griggs calmly pointed out that the purpose of the evening's discussion should not be to stage a battle over data. The purpose should be to examine the consequences of CPD practices on actual community members subjected to repeated stops and searches, on actual community members Roberts offensively identified as criminals. This is not a battle over data. It's a struggle to understand our history and to construct an equitable community.
Thank you.